Hello, I'm Dr. Scott Wadier.
And I'm Tommy Welling, and you're listening to the Fasting for Life podcast.
This podcast is about using fasting as a tool to regain your health, achieve ultimate wellness, and live the life you truly deserve.
Each episode is a short conversation on a single topic with immediate actionable steps. We cover everything from fat loss and health and wellness to the science of lifestyle design.
We started Fasting for Life because of how fasting has transformed our lives, and we hope to share the tools that we have learned along the way. Hey everyone, welcome to the Fasting for Life podcast. My name is Dr. Scott Wadier, and I'm here as always with my good friend and colleague, Tommy Welling. Good afternoon to you, sir.
Hey Scott, how are you?
Doing fantastic, my friend. Excited for today's conversation. We are going to dive into an older article from 2017, but then give you some updates from a more recent meta-analysis in 2023. And we're going to be talking about the infamous cholesterol. Dun, dun, dun. So, if you are new to the podcast, want to welcome you in. Thanks for giving us a shot. If you want to know more about Tommy, myself, what it is that we do, or more importantly, why we do it and how fasting has absolutely transformed our lives, head back, give episode 1 a listen. It'll tell you a little bit more about why we do what we do week in and week out, why we do the weekly podcast, why we have our coaching, our challenges, and all the other resources on the website, thefastingforlife.com. So welcome if you are new. If you are back for another riveting episode and some good jokes and a little bit of fun banter and nuance, applying a fasting lifestyle and exiting that dieting weight loss roller coaster once and for all, then welcome back. Shout out to the OGs. Appreciate y'all listening in and week out. I'm going to do a little call to action here, Tommy, as I got a personal message from someone giving us a review on the podcast. So here is the call to action is the more reviews and downloads and shares and likes we can get, the more impact we can have. And our mission at Fasting for Life is to pull one person, one by one, out of the dieting roller coaster, the lifestyle-induced disease roller coaster, and so-called take the red pill and know that you have a choice when it comes to your weight and ultimately your health. So I want to give you all a shout out. We really like reviews. We absolutely prefer the 5-star kind, and thankfully we have lots of them. So that tells us that you're hearing the things you need or want to hear. So if you'd be so kind, follow, like, share, review, download, whatever the terminology is these days, whatever the kids are saying.
Yeah.
We would greatly appreciate it. But I got this message from a family member. It was in reference to the August 13th episode, Movement Strategies to Lower Blood Pressure. Blood sugar. And the message was, this episode is badass. The numbers were a bit much, but you both made your point well. Well done.
Nice.
And I was like, shout out. Shout out to you, sir. Uncle Dave. Keep up the good work. Really appreciate you listening in, first and foremost. And excited for the changes that you're going to see. So, Tommy, awesome. When we talk about cholesterol, most people, when they think cholesterol, what's the first thing they think?
They think bad. Cholesterol bad.
Yeah, now there are good cholesterol molecules too. Just to mention that cholesterol is pretty important. If you are looking for a different perspective on cholesterol and you're still operating in the model that LDL cholesterol is the driving factor for cardiovascular disease, and your medical provider or your medical providers or your healthcare team are still focusing on that number, then that is a travesty in our opinion, and that is outdated science. And you should think about reading the book, The Great Cholesterol Myth, and talking to some different folks and thinking about things a little bit differently and getting a different perspective, because cholesterol is ultimately a very important molecule. It's upstream. It makes up a lot of our brain and our nerves. And it's upstream from things like pregnenolone and progesterone and DHEA and testosterone and cortisol and estrogen. And really
Vital
important,
stuff.
hormones in our body, which are the chemical messengers. So there's a relationship to the HPA axis, which we won't get into today, but we talk about in the HPT axis and the HPO axis and all of these things that help regulate our body on a day-to-day basis and our weight and our fat storage and our overall metabolic health. So if cholesterol is a good, bad, LDL only metric for you, then the conversation today is really going to be focused on how we can get balance and homeostasis to our lipid profile as a whole. We talk about lifestyle with fasting. Well, we want balance. We want improvement in our lipid profile. And that's what the articles that we're going to mention today really talk about, and directly related to this fasting lifestyle and how fasting can have an absolutely beneficial effect on these numbers, right?
Wow. Yeah. And that's a big target right there, because if we think about, if we zoom out and think about blood work, we think about how we kind of look at our cardiometabolic health and our lipid profiles. Dyslipidemia is a pretty broad term where we're talking about imbalance in our lipid profiles in our blood work. And the sources can definitely be many, but when we're stacking on weight, or we can't get the weight off, we've been on the regain train maybe, or we're eating multiple times a day, even if it's relatively good food, a lot of that time, if it's too much or too often, it can lead to some dyslipidemia. If it's worse food and it's less often, that can also lead to dyslipidemia too. So to your point, finding ways to get better balance within our lipid profile can sometimes be a little bit counterintuitive, which is exactly why this was a really cool study looking at all of the prior information on lipid profiles with regards to different fasting schedules and methodologies that were out there, and then proposing some mechanisms for how that balance in the lipid profiles came about as well, which is great because the physiology is still being uncovered on that stuff. Because, to a previous point that you made, 10, 15, 20 years ago, those smaller cholesterol particles weren't even part of the conversation. And now we're figuring out like exactly where more of the emphasis should go, rather than just painting with a broad brush, like cholesterol bad. That would have been like a very old mentality for it.
HDL good, LDL bad, right?
Yeah.
So we want to look at a total cholesterol panel, VLDL, LLDL. We want to look at ApoB, ApoA. We want to make this simple, though, in that the application here isn't going and worrying about those numbers per se. It's going to be the actions that we take on a day-to-day basis. And there's some really cool takeaways from this paper. The first one that we found, and then we went and got some updated data, because there are some limitations to this one that we'll mention. So this review is in it's in the Journal of Clinical Nutrition, and I always want to say ESPN, but it's ESPEN, ESPEN.
Yeah.
And you can get all the links in the show notes. Impact of intermittent fasting on the lipid profile, assessment associated with diet and weight loss. So the review aimed to consolidate studies that analyze the lipid profile in humans before and after intermittent fasting periods through a detailed review. And then, like you mentioned, which is really cool, propose the mechanism, and then considering the diet and the weight loss that was seen, right? So the cool thing about this is it was seen in normocaloric, meaning like no caloric deficit with fasting, and also seen in hypocaloric, which means fasting decreasing the amount of food or calories that you eat. And it looked at healthy, obese, and men and women that had abnormal lipid panels already. So total cholesterol elevation, LDL too high, triglycerides too high, and HDL too low. So the majority of the studies that were already out there that analyze this, one of the limitations in this is there was a lot of Ramadan observational studies, and just a few in this one, meta-analysis. What's the word I'm looking for?
Like RCT, randomized control trials.
Thank you. RCT is not the second article we're going to be going over here is going to be a systematic review and meta-analysis on metabolic related disorders. That's a mouthful. But for this one, it was really cool to see that, Tommy, the fasting windows which we joke in the intermittent fasting world is like, oh, a 12-12. So you slept and ate a late breakfast. That's not really fasting, right? So a lot of these studies were in the intermittent fasting windows were 12-12 splits. And if you're new to fasting, that means 12 hours where you can eat, 12 hours where you can fast.
Yeah, which is roughly like a Ramadan split to like a sunrise, sunset. And so that's kind of where it starts and where a lot of the observational data comes from. And the cool thing here was also that I wanted to highlight the data sources went up towards the end of 2017 for this one. But then what we've seen since 2017 up until now, we've seen a lot more very deliberate and randomized control trials and very deliberate studies done,
which
and
we talk about often.
Yeah. But those weren't included in this meta-analysis, and so that's exactly why we wanted to highlight some new information too. But this is cool because there is a little bit of alternate day fasting in here, a little bit of 5-2, a little bit of 16 hours fasting with 8 hours eating window. But like you said, a lot of observation for Ramadan. And so the great thing here is that with the proposed mechanisms and with the trends that we see in the actual lipid profile data from these data sets, the directionality is what's really important. And oftentimes what we see in studies like this, and this one is no exception, is that the greater the fasting number of hours, the greater the results in a lot of these. So it's like, what's moving the needle? Well, what's moving the needle is time away from of the food and the fuel coming in, and then the liver having to process that. So we're needing to expand that time horizon right there, and so that's typically leading to more of the the desired outcomes, which would be balance in the lipid profile, and then on the scale, et cetera.
So another thing I want to mention is, so we're talking about 12-12 all the way up to ADF. And ADF is one of the most researched fasting protocols that we've seen. So the RCTs, the randomized controlled clinical trials in this one were mainly ADF schedules. So we have 13 sedentary men, 14 men and women in general well health, 6 nutritionally focused women, 18 obese women, 17 obese women, 18 obese women, 24. 16 of those men and 8 women, and it just keeps going. Then we had some groups of resistance trained men and athletes and physically active men and women that have metabolic syndrome. So there really is a broad spectrum here. But one thing that stood out to me was the fact that when people come to fasting, we get a lot of folks that are like, low carb, no carb, carnivore, carbs are the devil, cholesterol and carbs, bad.
Right.
We're not anti-carb. Like, we've talked a lot about this. It's if you have blood sugar issues, then we need to reduce your carbohydrates, create some sustainability, remove the breads and pastas, and more importantly than that, the ultra-refined, processed, sugary-laden foods and drinks.
Sure, yeah.
Right? To get insulin down with fasting to give your body the opportunity to heal.
Those hit the liver so fast that they cause a lot of these issues really, really quickly and more efficiently, like in the worst way possible than the other food groups, the other macronutrients.
So the macronutrient conversation, carbs, fat, protein, what do you guys, what's the best fasting window? The one you can stick to. What's the best, that gets you results. What's the best meal plan? Let me ask you a few questions. What do you like to eat? Okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
If you don't like fish, I'm like, eat salmon every day. You're going to be like, no, I don't want to do that. So with this conversation about the macro composition, so carbs, fat, protein, is that a lot of these studies, especially the RCTs on ADF, they were, what we typically will see is 56% carbohydrates, 60%, 65%, 51%, 52%, 70%, 55%.
Wow.
There was only one study where it matches more of what we recommend, and you can grab the blueprint to fasting to fat loss in the show notes if you want to know if you are a tracker and a calorie. We're going to do a complete episode on tracking here coming up in the near future. Because a lot of people come to fasting and leave tracking it's a skeleton in the closet. Like, I don't want to do that anymore, right? Like, I'm done with
Been
my
there,
fitness
done
pal.
that.
Yeah, that didn't
I
work
got
for
that
me,
T-shirt.
right?
It sucks. Yeah, it doesn't fit anyway. Yeah.
Yeah, that trophy's on my shelf,
Right.
getting dusty. Is that there was one study where it was a 40, 45, 15 split. Now, carbs were 40, fat was 45, protein was 15. We would love to see 40, 40, 20, which would be flipped protein, fat, carb, especially if you're in a fat loss phase with fasting. It just makes your fasting easier.
Sure.
It helps speed up your metabolic flexibility. You feel better, the cravings go away, et cetera, et cetera. So just from a big picture, this is not an ideal situation to see great results on a lipid profile.
No, it's not. It's absolutely not. And I also just heard you mention a little while ago was just the fact that even in the athletes that were in these subsamples, these subgroups, you can have dyslipidemia. You can be very athletic. You can be a runner. You can be a CrossFitter. You could have a six pack and not have a balanced lipid profile too. And so it's great to see that wide broad group within all of the sub studies that were looked at in this.
So in terms of weight loss, we saw just over 1 kilogram all the way up to 6.5 kilograms of weight loss, because this is something else that they tracked. And so we saw, one of the studies, 4.8 kilograms, body fat, this is body fat change. 4.8, 5.4, 4.2 kilograms. So multiply that by what's the conversion? I'm terrible.
2.2.
2.2. So, 5.4 is, well over 10 pounds. 4.2 is well over 8 pounds, So as we go down, the lower the change in body fat, these were more in the athletic, healthy study groups that they looked at. And some were done by DEXA, some were done by bioelectrical impedance. So I don't want to get stuck in the weeds, but as well as looking at these kind of 12-12 windows and these higher carb compositions of macros, right, versus what we like to see for long-term consistency or results, we were still able to see these changes, Tommy, which is, I just want to rat-a-tat-tat them and we can pick a couple out. In terms of these non-ideal situations, right? Limitations of the study, we all talked about that. HDL, the good, air quotes, good cholesterol, right, went up 1 to 14 milligrams per deciliter. Winner, winner, chicken dinner.
Right.
The LDL decrease.
That's like 3 to 40%.
That's crazy.
That's
from
big,
normal
yeah.
range, right?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, you got the percentages. Please share it. LDL decreased from 1 to 47 milligrams per deciliter.
Yeah. I mean, that's up to like a 35% reduction.
Blah, right?
Yeah.
Oh, here's your medication. How about I just go 12-12 and eat a bunch of carbs? Like, I'm going to get...
Yeah.
There was this is anecdotal because I don't have it in front of me, but I remember hearing something about the Oreo cookie study improving an LDL panel. Like, that was in the social media world. Do you remember
really?
hearing that? Yeah.
No, I don't remember that.
All right, do a little search real quick.
Okay.
Give me some grace, because I just had this pop into my head. Like, it was like somebody was eating Oreo cookies and like their cholesterol panel got better. I'm like, what was their starting point? What was that mechanism of action, right? So
yeah, it must not have been Oreo cookies all day then. Maybe it was time compartmentalized. TRE, Oreo TRE.
So the mechanisms in this article are really cool. In terms of looking at, I don't want to mention the big, like the sciencey stuff, because even some of that I'm like, okay, where are you going with this mechanism? But the decreased VLDL, the decreased LDL, the increased HDL, the decreased triglycerides, which are all good things, is really done by the decreased ApoB, which in my opinion is one of the more key metrics for heart disease and cardiometabolic issues now, way more than LDL ever was. In terms of a causative relationship. All of those things improved, and it has to do with the fatty acid oxidation that's done in the liver. So the liver, again, is a key component.
Yeah.
And which was something that I noticed on my original lab work, where my liver enzymes were elevated and my blood pressure was a little elevated, and I had some signs and symptomatology of metabolic syndrome, and I was on the path to, well, I was an undiagnosed pre-diabetic back then, carrying,
Me
wasn't
too.
morbidly obese, right? I was doing a lot of right things, but those numbers were still ticking up. So it's cool to see that the mechanism here is based in the liver and that fatty acid oxidation. So the LDL decrease. Now, here's the cool one. Total cholesterol decrease from 5 to 88 milligrams per deciliter.
Wow. I mean, that's up to a 40% reduction. So again, going back to where you started the conversation, which was cholesterol not bad, right? Cholesterol, very, very important precursor to so many hormones in different physiological processes. But at the same time, when cholesterol is getting out of range, out of whack, when it's one of the things on the lipid profile, it can become a very big target for some of those medications that, ideally we would like to be able to find a path away from those. And the fasting in this study bringing about such powerful balance to total cholesterol. I mean, that's incredible.
Yeah, the Oreo cookie thing is funny. We're not going to go into it, but it's like the baseline LDL-C, was 384, and then it reduced to 111, 71% reduction after Oreo cookie supplementation.
Yeah.
But then it returned, and then it was reduced to a nadir of 284 with high intensity statin therapy. So this is a case study experiment. Short-term Oreo supplementation lowered LDL-C more than 6 weeks of high intensity statin therapy.
Wow.
In a high responder subject on a ketogenic diet. The dramatic metabolic demonstration, consistent with lipid energy model, should promote further research. And here's the kicker: and not be seen as health advice.
Yeah. Right.
That's awesome.
Oreo cookies are not a substitute for statins. That's what I heard, but or fasting.
Yeah, right. So anyway, sidebar, let's come back to the benefits of this, right? So 5 to 8 milligrams per deciliter total cholesterol decrease, and then triglycerides from 3 to 64.
Wow. Amazing.
So, right? Non-ideal situations in terms of fasting or food choices, right? So the mechanisms: increase fatty acid oxidation in the liver, modulation of the ApoB and APOA and ApoB apolipoproteins, or that more advanced cholesterol panel, decreased VLDL production, right? All good things. And then we've got the weight loss we talked about. We've got the decreases in fat mass. This is the kicker. One of the RCTs showed a reduction, a 54% reduction in coronary artery disease risk. Wow.
That's amazing right there. And a lot of these results were with no change in body weight as well.
Right. The normal caloric studies, right? So we are just scratching the surface, and you're new to fasting or you fell off the wagon. Well, what do I do to get back on? You don't need to do a complete overhaul. You just need to shrink your eating window. Let's just start there. Don't even change your food choices yet.
Yeah, well, right? I mean, one step at a time.
Yeah.
Get consistent with that.
Yeah, just start with one tiny little thing, and that's hopefully the empowering part of this. I thought one other thing was interesting, Tommy, is that there were conflicting results from a cross-sectional study on skipping breakfast, and we've shifted our opinion on this recently with fasting, is that we'd love you to eat an earlier window than a later window when it comes to insulin response, blood sugar response, fat burning, sleep, etc.
Yeah.
It's not that the calorie is bad after 8 p.m. It's your body's response to that calorie after 8 p.m.
Sure. It's ready to go to sleep. Response. It's ready to turn that machinery off.
Right.
Yeah.
So I thought that was interesting. We agree with that. We've done studies on that in the past. And looking at this in conclusion, before we move on to the next one, just to touch on some newer data, that intermittent fasting improved lipid profiles in healthy, obese, and dyslipidemic individuals, meaning individuals that already had abnormal cholesterol panels. So, yes, we need more RCTs. Yes, we need larger sample sizes. And yes, since 2017, we've gotten all those things.
Which is really, really good, because now if we were to repeat this study, we'd be digging into a deeper bucket And that bucket would also be full of studies that were specifically designed to look for, hey, we want to control for these outcome measures. We don't want it just to be based on observational Ramadan. We want to use different varied fasting windows, and maybe, hopefully, with a little bit more intention around the macronutrient profiles as well. That would be a really good thing. And we've seen a lot of that, and a lot of the new fasting studies, they mention that they look for lipid profiles as far as the outcome measures go, and we also do see a lot more HOMA-IR being looked at as far as measurement of insulin resistance for those outcome measures too. Whereas in 2017 we saw a lot less of that too.
So this newer study that we came across when we went down the rabbit hole of like, all right, yeah, there's some limitations here. It's a little bit older. The mechanisms make sense, but mechanisms don't always result in clinical outcomes. So the Journal of Clinical Medicine, this was a systematic review. This was from 2023, and it's the effects of intermittent fasting on regulation of metabolic homeostasis, a systematic review and meta-analysis in health and metabolic-related disorders, right? So if we're talking about metabolic syndrome, you mentioned some of the markers, that we like to look at is, insulin, HOMA-IR, the blood sugar numbers, the cholesterol panel. But the criteria for metabolic syndrome, this is what I was saying earlier about my own journey, is excess abdominal weight, so a waist circumference measurement. We talk about that. If you want more information on that, you can grab the insulin resistance assessment off of the website at thefastingforlife.com. It's free. It'll give you a subjective quiz, and then on the back, it will show you how to get your waist circumference ratio and how it is connected to metabolic syndrome and insulin resistance. And then we've got high triglycerides, low HDL, elevated blood sugar, and high blood pressure, which is that main criteria for metabolic syndrome. Now, typically when you have the cholesterol panel off, you're going to see more LDL with lower HDL and higher triglycerides as well, which is why we really wanted to talk about cholesterol, and that this second study was shown to create lipid panel homeostasis, which is the opposite of the bad I just mentioned in metabolic syndrome, which is increasing the HDL, decreasing the LDL and ApoB, decreasing the triglycerides, right? And bringing things back to normal. Because sometimes when you start fasting, you go get your blood work done and your numbers go up and you're like, well, wait a minute, what's happening? Well, you need to have this bigger picture, longer term. Like, don't expect this to change in 90 days. Let's retest in 6 months or 9 months, maybe in 12 months, and see where you're at.
Yeah, because what about the fact that you can have a short-term blip, right? A short-term uptick where you've been fasting recently. Maybe you've mobilized some fat stores. The scale's been ticking down, and then you're going in. If you're going in for blood work at that point, you might see some of the numbers a little bit off, whereas they looked better, 3 or 6 months ago at that point. Well, you've been mobilizing a lot more fat, so things have been in flux during that time, and they can take a little bit more time to kind of balance out, or as those fat stores get a little smaller, then you can see better balance there too. So sometimes there's a little bit of a timing aspect if you've been mobilizing some fat stores recently too.
Yep. So in the second study, just real brief, and then we'll wrap up with some action steps. It looks at alternate day fasting, time-restricted feeding or time-restricted fasting, and religious fasting. They're going to analyze the intermittent fasting on the metabolic outcomes in healthy individuals and those with metabolic disorders. It's a systematic review. They searched in multiple databases. They looked at adults with adiposity, so excess body fat, lipid. They wanted lipid homeostasis in some of those studies. They wanted insulin homeostasis and blood pressure. And what they did was they were able to find 64 initially and then 47 that were included in this meta-analysis. Healthy individuals, those with type 2 obesity or metabolic syndrome. So we've got varied groups, and they looked at adiposity, so weight, BMI, waist circumference. They looked at HDL, LDL, total cholesterol, and triglycerides. They looked at fasting insulin, fasting glucose, HOMA-IR, and they looked at blood pressure. And the results were pretty cool in that ADF showed the most beneficial effects compared to the time-restricted feeding in the religious fasting,
Yeah.
although all groups showed improvement.
Okay. Yeah, and I did also notice that the religious fasting had less impact on the blood lipid profiles, on the adiposity outcomes. So it's good to note that too, because on the religious fasting front, what you mentioned earlier, which was the earlier eating window, you don't really get that benefit on the religious fasting observational studies, because with respect to Ramadan specifically, sunrise to sunset, you can have very, very late eating and very, very late eating windows. And so then that may not translate as as significantly to the lipid profiles too, or the benefits.
So when we look at, what's the takeaway, right, of these studies, and what's the application for, a new person listening or someone that's been on the fasting journey for a while? Well, first and foremost, it's encouragement that fasting has a lot of powerful effects that are taking place beneath the surface, irrespective of big lifestyle food changes, and which we do for long-term weight loss and health and sustainability, we do encourage. And the fact that there's also things that are going to happen beneath the surface, right, that are happening in your blood panels and in your physiology that you might not be seeing if you're only focusing on things like the scale.
Yeah, absolutely. These could be happening while the scale is moving or while the scale isn't moving. A lot of times, you may not be ready physiologically to shrink those fat stores until there's better balance in the blood, in your lipid profile. But obviously, you can't just get those numbers on a regular basis. So it's a matter of understanding the time frame of some of these things, because some of these things are in like the 30 days to move the needle, 60 days, 90 days to move the needle, but you might not be able to get them tested for another 3 months, 6 months, 12 months. So understanding that and then being patient with some of these things. Yeah, absolutely. Of course. It's encouragement.
Yeah, for sure. So fasting balances cholesterol panels. How do you accelerate those results even more? Well, get consistent with your fasting, make some conscious changes with your food choices. You can, look at moving your fasting window. You can grab the blueprint. You can head and join one of our upcoming challenges, where we will literally accelerate the learning curve for you and show you exactly what we do in terms of scheduling and pivoting and making it apply to your life, in the mindset shifts and the habits and those types of things. Yeah. But the big conversation for today is we need globally to have a shift in our understanding of cholesterol, where it is, at its importance, where it does truly become deleterious in our health, and how that we do have control over it. And we believe, and Tommy, I know it was for you and for me personally, and now the thousands of people that we've taken through almost 6,000 people through the challenges, and hundreds of people through the coaching programs, and the dozens of messages we get a week on, hey, it's working for me too. That if they can do it, and if we can do it, you can do it too.
Heck yeah, like Uncle Dave. And so, and what about the fact that
Uncle Dave?
Heck yeah. Well, what about the fact that if you're on one of these medications to get the blood profile back into order, just understanding that there is something else that you can be doing alongside that to enhance the effects, or maybe potentially open up the conversation about reductions or eventually getting off of those medications if that's right for you. I just love the fact that there are alternatives, very effective alternatives that can really just open up the clinical outcome possibilities and quality of life for everybody hearing this.
100%. So what do you do with all this information?
Take action.
Take an action.
Yeah.
Pick one thing that resonated with you today. Put it into action. Reach out. You got questions? Let us know. Grab a resource. Do something. Don't think about it. Take an action.
Yeah.
Messy action always trumps inaction. So we want to encourage you that fasting has been transformative for us and so many of our listeners. We appreciate y'all listening. And as always, Tommy, thank you for the conversation, sir. And we'll talk soon.
Thank you. Bye.
So, you've heard today's episode, and you may be wondering, where do I start? Head on over to thefastingforlife.com And sign up for our newsletter, where you'll receive fasting tips and strategies to maximize results and fit fasting into your day-to-day life.
While you're there, download your free Fast Start guide to get started today. Don't forget to subscribe on iTunes, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. Make sure to leave us a 5-star review, and we'll be back next week with another episode of Fasting for Life.